The story begins with a wedding. Liesel, listening to the priest's words, was mentally somewhere far away. The priest asked if the young people would swear to love each other and be together in sorrow and joy. While the lady was silent, the groom kept urging her on. The husband and all the guests were eagerly awaiting the woman's answer. After a long pause, she agreed, which made everyone happy. The smiling priest continued the ceremony and asked the newlyweds to exchange wedding rings, which were a symbol of their love. In the name of the goddess Armikin, the priest declared the bride and groom husband and wife. Liesel was overcome with mixed feelings. She felt like an unscrupulous woman who had married someone of convenience. In the evening, after the ceremony, Liesel felt tired, so she undressed and collapsed on the bed, exhausted. She was happy that the long day was finally over. Meanwhile, the maid asked the lady if she would like a cup of tea sometime. Liesel agreed, noting that she was very tired after the wedding and wanted to relax. The woman did not expect this to happen at all. At first, she could not even imagine that she would have a perfect ceremony, a grand banquet, an expensive dress, shoes, and accessories. Everything was at the highest level. Liesel's fiancé was Chester Hielos. The lady was a little sad that she had to get married so quickly. She didn't know if everything would go smoothly. While the lady was lost in thought, her husband brought her fragrant tea. At first, the lady thought it was a servant who had entered, but when she looked up, she saw Chester. The gentleman was very lightly dressed and asked his bride if she was ready. The woman sat on the bed in surprise and wondered why her lover had come. She blushed because her husband was practically naked, and she immediately asked him to cover up. But Chester had a different opinion. He believed he had the right to spend the night with his wife. Liesel began to laugh nervously and wondered if her husband was joking. The woman asked Chester if he intended to spend the night with her. The young man was surprised because it was supposed to be their wedding night. The lady was not at all ready for this. She blushed and looked intently at Chester. The lady hoped that Chester was not serious about all this, but the man slowly began to approach his wife, pulling his robe lower and lower. A frightened Liesel assured her husband that they had not agreed to this. Chester just laughed. He believed that if they were already husband and wife, then they must have a close relationship. Chester wondered if his wife needed time to think. In her mind, the lady was telling her husband to stop and not approach her with such a determined look. She didn't understand what had come over him. The man approached Liesel and held her tightly to him. Chester also asked the lady not to even dream of a dream. The lady considered the man's antics indecent because they had not discussed it. It all started 3 months ago. Liesel's father and another man were talking in raised tones. The Baron swore that there would be money next time, but the man had his doubts. The respected gentleman offered the man a deal that if he did not pay the money, he would have to pay with his daughter Liesel. But the Baron did not want to accept such an offer at all. The Lord gave the man 2 months and asked him to give him the money during that time. Otherwise, the fate of his daughter would change significantly. The man felt devastated. When the gentleman left, he cried. The wife tried to calm her husband down because all was not lost. The Baron was very ashamed and asked his daughter for forgiveness. But Liesel just smiled gently at her father and convinced him that nothing bad would happen to her because they still had time. The father approached his daughter and hugged her tightly. He also asked her to trust him because he was sure that he would never give his blood to a scoundrel. After the conversation, Liesel wanted to go to her room. Meanwhile, her parents were happy that her daughter had reacted so calmly to everything. Her mother noted that Liesel had grown up and become much wiser. When the lady left the room, she simply held her head. She even thought that she would have to sell the house. The woman looked at herself in the mirror and exclaimed loudly that she hated Liesel frozen. In reality, the woman was not Liesel. One day, she fell asleep while reading a book, and when she woke up, she was already Liesel from the novel. The problem was the lady's strange looks. Liesel's requests were simply unbearable, but instead of refusing her, the Baron went into debt. In the end, almost all of the family's property was taken away, and they were left in debt. The lady could not understand why she had to find a way out of the situation. The lady was quite nervous that the real Liesel had caused all the trouble, enjoying her wealth. And when it came time to pay the price, the real Liesel had disappeared. The woman tried to pull herself together because there was no time for whining. She had to think about where to get so much money. The lady had a brilliant idea. Liesel's gaze fell on the old owner's valuables. She didn't understand why they were still in the house. She also saw a pile of fancy dresses and decided to sell all this junk. The lady took out everything that could be sold, but she had no idea how much money she could get for all those things. She didn't know the local prices at all, so she decided to ask the butler to sell everything. The man was shocked by such a strange request from the lady, because not so long ago she had been buying many expensive things. The woman looked closely at the butler and asked how much they would give for all the things. Desperation was evident in the lady's eyes, so the butler decided to help her. He explained that these things were not new, so the prices could not be too high. This behavior was completely uncharacteristic of Liesel. The man thought that the woman was trying to help her father pay off his debt. A smile spread across his face, and he hugged the woman. The butler frankly admitted that he knew this day would come. He was so happy for the first time in his 20 years as a butler. The man was very proud of Liesel. He wanted to hug her again, but the lady wanted to go for a walk, so she quickly ran out of the house. When the woman went out into the fresh air, she thought that they would hardly be able to raise 80 million with what they had at that time. Things were bad. The lady wondered where she could get the money as soon as possible. The lady dreamed that money would just fall from the sky, but it was impossible. Due to the strong wind, one of the advertisements hanging nearby fell directly on the lady's face. Liesel decided to read the contents of what was written. The Lapelin child was wanted Hielos. The boy was only 5 years old. The reward for the child was 100 million. The woman immediately remembered that Lapelin was the main character in the novel. She realized that she had been there when he disappeared. The reward was large, and it was just the money the lady needed. Fortunately, there was no law in the short stories that forbade improving the lives of the fallen. The woman knew the child's whereabouts because she had read the short story carefully. The lady ran as fast as she could to the place she remembered, but there she saw only garbage bags. The woman was surprised that the hill actually turned out to be ordinary garbage. It was disgusting all around. Liesel couldn't understand why people threw away their food waste so carelessly. The smell was simply killing her. She decided to end her wanderings in the dump. The reward for finding the child was very encouraging to the lady. She intended to find the boy, even if she had to dive into 100 years of garbage. Liesel didn't want to be poor like in her past life. Digging through the garbage, after a fairly short time, the lady turned into a very untidy woman. The woman's shoes and clothes were in a dilapidated condition. One garbage bag alarmed Liesel. When she opened it, she saw the same missing child inside. The boy was in bad shape, and as soon as he opened his eyes, he called out for his mother. He had distinctive features, black hair and red eyes. Liesel smelled big money. The woman put her hand on the boy's forehead and realized that he had a fever. She quickly wrapped the child in a blanket and ran with him to her estate. The frightened parents looked at their daughter in confusion. Liesel didn't have time to explain anything, noting that small talk would have to wait. The lady asked to call a doctor as soon as possible. Lapelin was suffering from malnutrition and body aches. The doctor assured the woman that if the boy took the prescribed medicine and rested, he would soon feel better. Liesel politely thanked the man and wished him a good day. The doctor thought that the boy's parents had become so poor that they had forced the child to writhe in pain from hunger. Liesel indignantly assured him that neither she nor her parents had starved the child. The lady had no strength left. The fact that the boy would live already lifted her spirits and gave her hope. The woman tenderly looked at the child and was sure that he was definitely the main character. Liesel simply wiped the boy's face, and it immediately brightened. The lady wondered how Lapelin had gotten into such a predicament. The woman decided it had something to do with his father. The man lived with his beloved woman for a long time. He met her while walking on the outskirts of the city. Later, the lady gave birth to a son, Lapel. But the Duke, Lapel's grandfather, was against the marriage of the young people, since the girl came from an ordinary family. Only after the grandfather died, the lovers played a wedding. Rumor had it that the young people had had an accident on the way back. Finally, the woman realized that this was why Lapel, the only survivor, had taken refuge in the dump. The young lady felt uneasy. She realized that she had been so happy about the money she wanted to shake out at the expense of the child who had run away from his parents. In a whisper, the ladies asked the boy for forgiveness. Liesel didn't know what to say to Lapel when he woke up. The woman dismissed her conscience, which had awakened so unexpectedly, and decided that she would never see the boy again as soon as she got her money. In the novella, the Duke melted in front of Lapel, so the woman was sure that he would take good care of him. Meanwhile, a man brought the boy to the Duke and assured him that it was Lapel. The man was sure that the boy looked very much like a member of the Hielos family. The Duke agreed with the fact that the boy looked like his nephew. The cunning man immediately wanted to receive a reward from the master. A few minutes later, the servants entered the room. One servant handed the box to the man, saying that it was his promised reward for his efforts. The servants also brought a glass of Lapel's favorite juice, which was immediately given to him. When the boy drank the juice, nothing happened. Chester glared at the man, but whispered displeasedly that this was not Lapel, but a completely different child. The man thought he was very clever, but he wanted to trick the master to get money. The Duke exclaimed that they had to continue to check every child because everyone thought he could be fooled. Chester, furious, ordered the security guards to throw the man out the door. He was very annoyed by unscrupulous people who were ready to give up their own children for money. It would have been much easier if the Duke had known what his nephew really looked like. Meanwhile, next to the real Lepelian was Liesel, who had saved him. Liesel's parents learned that the boy who was in their house was actually Lepelian. Hielos. They were confused and shocked by such unexpected news. The lady's mother asked if it was the same boy who had disappeared after the accident. Liesel confirmed her mother's words and said that she had found him unconscious and decided to bring him home. The lady's parents breathed a sigh of relief, for they had feared that this was their daughter's son. Liesel wondered why her mother and father thought so of her, since she was only 20 years old. The woman convinced the parents that Lapel would go to the Duke as soon as his condition improved. The lady asked the mother and father not to block the passage, as she wanted to check on the child's condition. The mother handed her daughter the clothes she had worn when she was little. The woman noticed that her parents loved Liesel very much, and even her things were carefully kept on the estate. Liesel could not understand why such kind people had such a daughter. When the lady entered the room, the boy, having regained consciousness, was sitting on the bed. The woman asked her how the child was doing. She was also happy that the boy could now sit up. Lapel called Liesel mother, and she held her breath. With sadness, the lady informed the boy that she was not his mother. Lapel's eyes filled with tears, and he cried bitterly. Liesel hugged the child and held him close, trying to calm him down. The boy was crying wildly and wanted to go to his mom and dad. He couldn't understand where his parents had gone. The woman thought that at that time, Lapel had lost his memory due to a state of shock. He couldn't even remember his mother's face. Liesel decided that was too much of a burden for the child. She couldn't tell the boy the whole truth, but she hugged him tightly. The woman also assured Lapel that everything would be fine and asked him not to cry. She knew that the child's family was waiting for him. The lady promised that as soon as the boy felt better, she would immediately take him to his relatives. The frightened boy realized that the woman was not part of his family. The lady introduced herself to the boy and also reminded him of his name. The child stopped crying. The boy only had to get better, and he immediately asked what he needed to do to get better. The woman smiled and told him that he just needed to eat pills and rice. Liesel also suggested that Lapel bathe. The woman only wiped the boy with a damp towel, but he still smelled bad. The lady assured the child that bathing was also necessary to be healthy. A toy duck was floating in the bathtub with water, and the lady assured the boy that the toy was already waiting for him. The woman gradually began to lower the child into the water, but Lapel was not delighted and began to cry. Liesel tightly and began to scream loudly that he did not want to swim. The woman was in despair because she did not know how to find an approach to Lapel. Still, the lady managed to persuade the child to wash himself. After the bath, the woman showered the boy with compliments, saying that he was cute and handsome after the bath. The lady was about to feed the child. The boy stubbornly shook his head, thinking that the woman was trying to appease him with her praise. Liesel smiled and promised that she would only praise Lapel for the right reasons. The boy muttered in dissatisfaction that he didn't want to eat at all. But the woman decided to play a trick and play a game of flying airplanes with the boy. She would circle the spoon left and right, and then quickly put the spoon in his mouth. Lapel liked the interesting food and wanted more. The woman laughed and assured the boy that the next plane was ready for the trip. The surprised child asked what a plane was. The woman said it was a carriage that flew in the sky. Liesel got carried away by the game and said they were running out of fuel. Then the lady said that the plane was landing quickly on the ground and deftly put the spoon in the child's mouth. Suddenly, the woman came to her senses, not realizing what she was doing. The lady remembered that she was going to send the baby to the Duke as soon as his condition improved, but instead, she played games with him. Lady remembered how Lapel ran up to her and hugged her tightly. The boy didn't want to go swimming because he thought the water was scary and said it was suffocating. The boy was very frightened. The lady thought that the carriage had fallen into the water in an accident, and that was why the poor child was afraid of water. The boy was only 5 years old, and the lady felt sorry that such a terrible fate had befallen him from his early childhood. She could not help but console him, for he was so sweet and kind. The woman could not ignore or leave such a handsome boy without love. She took on the responsibility of caring for the child until she could hand him over to the Duke. The woman invited the baby to say hello to her parents. She happily tossed him in the air. Lapel and Liesel had a great time together. Meanwhile, one unfriendly man was very angry. He was furious because his subordinates still could not find Lapel. The master gave the men exactly a month because he needed the child's body. Liesel's parents greeted the baby. They were stunned by how beautiful and friendly the little boy was. But Lapel, on the contrary, was frightened by the behavior of the people, and he almost cried, hiding behind Liesel's dress. The woman asked the boy not to be afraid, because no one wanted to harm him. The boy confidently pointed out that there was another Liesel next to them. Everyone laughed. The lady explained to the child that it was her mother, and that was why they had such a resemblance. The Baron leaned over to the boy and said that he also looked like Liesel. Lapel looked at the man incomprehensibly. Liesel's mother invited everyone to the table. There were delicious dishes on the table. Lapel started to eat, but pushed the carrot aside, adding that he did not want to and did not like to eat it. Liesel assured the boy that he needed to eat everything to be healthy. The kid frowned at the woman, saying she was mean. The lady's parents looked at each other and laughed, and told her that Liesel also didn't eat carrots as a child, and she also refused to eat bell peppers. The lady couldn't understand why the parents had told her such details at that very moment. It was obvious that the baby wouldn't start eating carrots after such words. Evening came. The lady wished the boy sweet dreams and carefully covered him with a blanket. But Lapel squeezed the lady's hand and did not want her to leave. The woman thought that something had happened, or that the boy was in pain. He denied it and asked her not to go. Liesel had completely forgotten that the little boy had spent a lot of time in the dump. The woman was convinced that Lapel was scared to be there alone, so he wanted hugs, love, and warmth. The lady asked if the boy wanted her to sleep next to him. Lapel laughed and began to shout joyful words. Lady understood that if she became even more attached to the boy, it would be difficult for her to say goodbye to him later. The next morning, Lapel was full of strength and energy. He immediately ran to draw a picture of Marchen's servant, Liesel, and her good parents. The boy had even started calling Liesel's parents grandparents. Everyone was delighted with the child's drawing and praised it profusely. Everyone had a great time that day, but the moment came when the boy had to be taken to the Duke. Liesel's mother asked her daughter to leave the child with them for one more day. But Liesel insisted that Lapel should return to his estate, as she was sure that his family was very worried about him. Despite bitter tears and a reluctance to part, the boy and Liesel got into the carriage and set off for the duchy. The lady was glad that the boy got better much faster than she had thought. Although the lady understood that if they had stayed together longer, her heart would eventually be broken, and it would be difficult to exchange the baby for a reward. After a short time, the carriage entered the Duke's estate. The knights opened the gate, and the lady was enchanted by the beauty that surrounded her. The first thing that caught her eye was the vast garden. Liesel and Lapel were also impressed by the fountain. The house was much larger than Liesel's. The woman knew that the Duke was rich, but the estate simply screamed about the obscene wealth of its owner. The servant greeted Liesel and Lapel politely. The man asked them to sit on the sofa and said that the Duke would be here soon. The lady smiled because she thought the butler was handsome. Suddenly, the woman realized that she was beginning to feel nervous for some unknown reason. It occurred to her that she was being oppressed by the luxury of the estate. The boy noticed Liesel's anxiety and asked if everything was okay. Chester entered the room. Hyalos. He was described as a very handsome man. The lady believed that Mother Nature had worked very hard to create such a handsome man. Instead of saying hello, the lady, without knowing how, said that the man was very hot. She blushed with shame and covered her mouth. The lady looked at the man with fear, hoping he hadn't heard her. But the boy heard everything and wondered if the lady associated the Duke with hot food. Liesel almost collapsed from shame. The woman had the impression that the law of meanness only worked with hits, and she took that as some kind of excuse. The butler asked permission to leave the young people. Meanwhile, Liesel asked Lapel to be quiet while she spoke to his uncle. Liesel finally introduced herself to the Duke. The woman assured the lord that the boy was the very child he was looking for. Lapel greeted the Duke politely. The Duke's gaze alarmed Liesel, for she knew for sure that Lapel was his nephew. Even before meeting the woman, the Duke knew very well that Mrs. Frozen was waiting for him. The lady was known to all as a spendthrift. Chester had heard before that the woman had led a luxurious life, and because of this, her family was bankrupt. The man was convinced that the woman had picked up the child and lured him for a reward. The butler understood him well, but asked the man to make sure the information was accurate. Considering what Liesel was like, Chester was convinced that she needed the reward for her own purposes. The butler completely understood the gentleman's position, as previous scams had driven him to despair. The man was furious that people were willing to sell their own children for money. Because of all this, Chester began to despise such unscrupulous people who only thought about money and put children's lives at risk. Chester glared at Liesel, considering her the worst he had ever seen, because no one would dare bring such a thin and emaciated boy to his estate. It occurred to the man that Liesel had deliberately tortured the child to appear more convincing. But the man pulled himself together and asked the boy if he was really Lepelian. By Hyalos! The little boy laughed and nodded his head in agreement. He also added that Liesel had said that was his name. Chester was beginning to realize more and more that the boy was definitely not his nephew. The Duke looked at the lady intently and asked where she had found the child. The woman became agitated, and it occurred to her that if she told the truth, it would upset her husband. Liesel decided it was better to tell the bitter truth than to make up a sweet lie. The Duke thought at the time that the woman was trying to come up with a place where she had found the baby. Liesel truthfully admitted that she had found the child in the dump. Chester was convinced that the lady had made it up so that he would feel sorry for the child. Chester asked displeasedly why the child was in the dump. The lady smiled, but noted that she had no idea. Lapel said that Liesel had said that the boy had no memory of the accident. Chester was furious because he thought the lady was a terribly unscrupulous woman who had made the child lie so that he wouldn't ask any questions. The Duke was sure that he was too much for the lady and wanted to expose her lies as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the woman did not understand why Chester was looking at her so intently. The gentleman leaned closer to Lady Frozen and asked her again why she was sure it was Lapel. The man exclaimed that the boy had lost his memory and did not even remember his own name. The gentleman did not understand how the woman could be so sure that it was Lapel and not some other child. The lady became angry and wondered why the man asked about it. Liesel was surprised, because the ad gave a complete description of the boy, and she brought him in. The lady tried hard to bring the child to the Duke, and for this, she received only reproaches and accusations. Chester was quite sure that the woman was a fraud, but he couldn't understand why she was so sure. The lady finally understood the strange looks the man was giving her. Chester clearly doubted the woman's honesty, and this infuriated her. It seemed to the boy that the young people were playing a game of who had the stronger gaze. Lapel, of course, was rooting for Liesel. Suddenly, the butler entered the room. The Duke could not understand why the servant had not brought the juice. The butler wondered why the master's face was so distorted, and he seemed quite dissatisfied. The servant informed Chester that the shelf had fallen, and all the bottles of magic-dispelling potions had broken. The master looked at the servant displeasedly and grabbed his head. The butler noted that he had ordered more potions, but the ingredients were so rare that the potions would not arrive for another month. Chester was disappointed that he had not been able to put the swindler in his place. The servant suggested sending the lady home. Chester approached the lady, apologized, and said that he would be able to give the reward only next month. Chester, without hiding anything, frankly said that only in a month they would be able to obtain a potion to dispel the magic imposed on the appearance. Liesel looked at the gentleman with displeasure. The woman accused Mr. Helos of being unscrupulous, but the man said that everyone around him wanted to deceive him, so he took everything very seriously. The lady understood that Chester had reasons not to trust her, but she thought it was rude for the man to tell her to her face that she was a fraud. Liesel didn't want to see her husband anymore, but decided to leave. She suggested that he contact her when the potion appeared. Suddenly, Chester asked to wait. The Duke wanted the lady to leave the child and go herself. Lapel, hearing this, hugged Liesel tightly. It was obvious that Chester was Lapel's uncle, but he still did not believe it and suspected the lady of lying. The woman could not understand why Chester wanted to keep Lapel on the estate. The lady exclaimed that she did not want to and would not. It occurred to the man that it was all because of the reward. The Duke explained that if the lady was truly honest, he would definitely pay her the money. That was why the man wanted Mrs. Frozen to keep the child. But that wasn't the point. Liesel explained that she was responsible for the boy until the Duke accepted him as his nephew, so she didn't hesitate to say that she was taking him home. The Duke was sure that the conditions on his estate were much better, and he could not understand what Liesel was so afraid of. The woman was offended because the man had told her that her living conditions were much worse. Liesel asked Lapel if he liked her house and if he was ready to go back. The boy was delighted and wanted to go straight to his grandparents. The woman assured Mr. Helos that the boy wanted to come home to her. Chester considered Liesel an impudent woman and pointed out that if she took the child, there would be no reward. To smooth things over, the butler intervened. He politely explained to the lady that if she took the boy, it could be dangerous for both of them. The man asked her to think it over again. The lady looked at the men in surprise. The butler explained that the Helos family had many enemies. That was true. In the original story, there were many plots against them, and there were many encroachments. The Duke pointed out that if rumors spread that the lady had a child with the Helos family, they too could be targeted. The woman was even warned that innocent people could be harmed. Chester tried to expose the woman's lies, and even mentally asked her to try to pretend that her words and actions were sincere. The Duke believed that it was not enough to simply brainwash the child. One also had to appear caring. Mr. Helos was surprised by how sincere the words and hugs of the woman and the boy were. Chester, after thinking, suggested that the woman stay with them for a month. A few minutes later, the servant led Liesel and Lapel to their temporary room. The boy was beaming with happiness, running in circles. The butler was very responsible, so he managed to warn the lady's family that she would be visiting the duchy for some time. The man also asked the woman not to worry about resting. The servant politely introduced himself as Roan. The lady immediately asked the butler to prepare the carriage for the morning. She wanted to pack her things and tell her parents everything in detail. Since Lapel did not like to wake up alone, the lady decided that she would have to return before the child woke up. She decided to leave early in the morning. When Roan left the room, he immediately thought that the woman was a brilliant con artist because she continued to play her role even in front of him. Chester believed that the luxurious estate would appeal to the lady, and she would take the bait. It was only a matter of time before the whole truth would be revealed. The Duke ordered that he be informed of the woman's every move. Meanwhile, Lapel did not want to fall asleep at all. The night sky was very beautiful. The boy really wanted one of the stars to go to him. The lady, smiling, explained that this was impossible. They could not be caught. Lionel began to cry because he really wanted a star from the sky. Liesel reached out and pretended to catch it. When she opened her fist, it was empty. The little boy was upset. Suddenly, the lady looked intently into the child's eyes and noted that all the stars in the world were there. Liesel exclaimed that she definitely saw stars in the boy's eyes. The baby was very tired and wanted to sleep. Suddenly, the woman realized that everything had gone wrong because it was quite late. She still needed to take care of the baby. Liesel, sleepless, dozed off in the carriage. When the carriage hit a stone, the woman hit her head on the window. It was so hard to convince her parents to let their daughter go. She wanted to get back to the estate as soon as possible and get some sleep. Suddenly, Mrs. Frozen wanted to stop for a moment, saying that she would be back soon. The carriage stopped near the market. As expected, there were many people there. The market also sold a variety of things, from magical tools to food. It occurred to the lady that the stalls must also have decorative items with stars on them. Suddenly, Liesel saw a strange ball of stars. Real stars were inaccessible to mortals, so the lady was sure that Lapel would be delighted with such a gift. When Liesel touched the ball she had chosen for the child, the Duke was standing next to her, also touching the ball at that moment. The young people looked at each other in surprise. The Duke had also been in a hurry since morning. He was going to meet with a man who had the information he needed. Roan asked the gentleman to try to finish the business as quickly as possible. The Duke also had a meeting with the elders. The butler knew very well that the man would be passing by the bazaar and asked him not to go there under any circumstances. To distract Rohan, the Duke asked how Liesel and the boy were doing. The butler said that the baby was asleep and the lady had gone home early in the morning. Roan tearfully asked the Duke not to buy magic balls, because there was already a place to put them. The master seemed to have heard nothing, only noted that it was time to leave. The butler nevertheless asked the man not to ignore him. The Duke remembered his conversation with his brother. It was then that he told Chester how much Lapel liked the stars. Watching the night sky, the boy would break into a very sweet and happy smile. Lapel's father also believed that such a smile could touch the heart of any person. Leon promised his brother that he would also see her someday. The Duke could not even imagine that these were his brother's last words. Chester that his brother was also worried about his son, even though he was already in heaven. The Duke asked Leon not to worry, but mentally promised that he would find Lapel and see to his happiness. Chester was quite surprised when he saw Liesel at the market, because he thought the woman was at home. The lady said that she had finished her business and decided to quickly run to the market on the way back. The Duke demanded that the lady take her hand off the ball and walk around, as she wished. The woman did not understand what the man was talking about, since she had touched the ball first. The saleswoman laughed and noted that the young people had excellent taste. The saleswoman said that the ball had magic on it, and if you touched its button, it would glow. It turned out that everyone liked the accessory so much that only the last one was left. The lady planned to give the ball to Lapel, so she was ready to fight for it. A fight broke out between the young people. Both of them wanted to buy the ball, and neither wanted to give in. Passers-by were surprised at such behavior of adults. One boy even said that his uncle and aunt were fighting over a toy. The lady was proud, but she had no intention of backing down. The woman came up with a cunning plan, and the Duke unwittingly dropped the bullet. The smiling lady handed the bullet to the saleswoman and indicated that she was ready to pay for it. Satisfied, Liesel smiled and walked cheerfully to the carriage. The Duke noticed that the lady looked happy, even though she had just bought a toy. The woman was not a child to be so happy about such a purchase. Chester didn't understand anything. Liesel, who adored gloss and luxury, was happy about such a trifle. The Duke didn't believe that such a thing was possible, and decided that the woman had specially arranged everything so that he would believe in her game. The happy lady hurried the Duke. The man thought her smile was false. Suddenly, one of the horses went berserk and rushed straight at the young people. Frightened, Liesel dropped the gift and fell to the ground. The groom hurried to the lady's aid. The man was very apologetic to her and explained that the horse had suddenly gone mad. Chester was lying on the ground, and Liesel was lying on top of him. The woman recovered and tried to get up. Thanks to Chester, she didn't get hurt. The lady politely apologized as she had no intention of falling on the Duke. Chester offered to help the groom, as he had to put away the boxes that were scattered on the ground. The woman understood that Chester was definitely not the man of her dreams, but he seemed like a good person. As Chester was stacking boxes, Liesel noticed a wound on his arm. The lady decided that the wound had occurred from a fall. The skin on His Majesty's arm had peeled off and needed to be bandaged, but the Duke just glanced at the woman and said that it was none of her business. Liesel felt a little uncomfortable, but she still offered the men her help. Everyone was very worried that the lady had volunteered to help and started carrying boxes. One man pointed out that it was not worth it for a frail woman to lift heavy boxes. After a while, the lady got into the carriage. Thinking, she examined the boxes, the contents of which she had purchased. The woman bought a magic ball and all sorts of trinkets for Lapel. The woman remembered how she had suggested that Chester buy Lapel some trinkets, and he had agreed. Liesel only wished she had taken her husband to an expensive store so he could empty his wallet even more. Suddenly, the Duke's carriage broke down. The wheels had come off, and it was undrivable. Since Lady Frozen and the Duke of Chester were heading to the Duke's estate, the groom suggested they ride in the same carriage. The woman had no idea whether it was worth trying to find common ground with such a rude man as Chester. Liesel called Chester anyway and asked if he would take her to his carriage. The master stubbornly refused to go with the woman, so he suggested that she go first. The servant asked His Majesty to go with Lady Liesel, but the man was strictly against it and wanted to wait. The carriage needed a wheel changed, and the servant suggested that it would take at least half a day to summon a mechanic. The servant also reminded the man that he had an appointment soon. Liesel planned to get home before Lapel woke up, so she asked the Duke to make a decision as soon as possible. In fact, the woman did not want them to ride together in the carriage at all, and mentally asked her husband to refuse. Chester, out of desperation, agreed. The lady was even angry because she did not want to travel with such a haughty man. There was too much luggage, and the young people had to sit opposite each other. Chester had rather long legs, and with every shake, the lady and the Duke's bodies touched, and the woman was very annoyed by this. Chester was also mentally nervous about accidentally touching the lady. His Majesty decided to cross his legs, but the situation only worsened. The leg, bent at the knee, bounced with greater amplitude due to the shaking. The lady could not understand why Chester sat down like that. The gentleman noticed that the lady was pushing his legs. The man decided not to be silent and muttered angrily that he was also uncomfortable. He tried to think about the lady's comfort, believing that she was only thinking about her own comfort. The atmosphere in the carriage was becoming increasingly tense. The woman decided to take a nap, so she tried to find a comfortable position. After a few minutes, completely restless, the lady fell into a sweet sleep. Chester was surprised because the lady had simply fallen asleep after their struggle. The man looked more closely to see if the woman was really asleep and not pretending to be. At such a moment, the lady looked like an innocent child. Chester instantly scolded himself for his thoughts, because he couldn't believe he had thought such a thing. Chester knew firsthand that a person should not be judged by their appearance and clothes. The man immediately remembered his childhood, when his father had hit him simply for interrupting him. At that moment, the older brother Leon stood up for the boy. The father, who should have loved his child more than anyone else, behaved like a cruel freak. Chester that Liesel pretended to be asleep. Suddenly, the lady's head moved and she hit the glass hard, but she was so sound asleep that she didn't even feel it. The carriage hit a rock again, and the lady hit the glass again, quite hard. The Duke tried to wake the lady, but she was sleeping too deeply. Chester reflexively placed his hand under the lady's head to prevent her from hitting him again, because it was quite painful for him to watch such a scene. Liesel had a pleasant dream and hugged the Duke tightly. Then the woman began to whisper something to her mother. Chester found the lady very strange, and he could not explain her behavior in any other way. Lapel was a very active child, and when he woke up, he started running around the estate. The servants were trying to catch the boy. The baby was crying and calling for Liesel, and he didn't want anyone to touch him. The estate was in chaos. The servants ran after Lapel, but could not catch him, and the little boy was screaming at the top of his lungs and calling for Liesel. The maid explained it. Also stout? Against that they had told the boy that the lady would be arriving soon. Liesel immediately. Roan understood why Liesel was in such a hurry to return to wake the baby. The butler looked out the window and saw the carriage. He breathed a deep sigh, knowing that the child would finally calm down. But the woman continued to sleep sweetly and soundly. The Duke and Roan tried to wake the lady, but it was all in vain. The butler wondered why the young people had arrived in one carriage and asked where the other carriage was. Chester explained that the wheel had come off and they had to ride together. Finally, the sleepy lady woke up. She felt a strange pain in her head and thought that she must have hit herself several times while she was asleep. Chester glanced at Liesel in surprise, for she had been fine at the time of the blow and had a headache immediately after waking up. His Majesty thought he would soon lose his mind in the presence of a woman. Chester decided to ignore the lady until the potion arrived. Entering the estate, the gentleman seemed stunned. There was noise and chaos all around. Lapel was running and shouting, and the servants were running after him. When the boy saw Liesel, he immediately rushed to her with tears in his eyes. The little boy cried, but despite everything, he was happy that he had finally met the lady. After calming down, Lapel said that the woman was cruel because she left him alone. Roan pointed out the obvious fact that the boy was very attached to Liesel. Chester nevertheless asked the man to be careful until they could find out the truth. His Majesty ordered Rowan to report to him immediately if he noticed anything suspicious. Liesel felt very tired and wanted to rest. But first she had to calm the baby down. The woman did not understand why the boy was crying, since she was already next to him. The baby, crying, begged Liesel not to throw him away. The woman assured the boy that she had no such intention, that she simply needed to be away for a short time on business. Lapel continued to cry because he was afraid of being left alone. The boy even thought that he would have to return to the dump. The woman hugged the baby tightly and promised that she would not leave him. Finally, Lapel calmed down. The lady asked the boy to wait a moment because she remembered her gift. When the lady opened the box, she took out a magic ball. The boy was very happy with the gift because he loved stars very much. But that was not all. Liesel gave Lapel the ball and went to close the curtains because she wanted to show something. Lapel blinked his eyes in surprise. Liesel pressed the button, and the stars on the ball began to glow, illuminating the entire room. Lapel was amazed by the beauty that was all around. He held the ball tightly to himself, realizing that he was now its owner. The lady also added that this was the boy's home and no one would ever drive him out. The boy felt incredibly happy. He hugged the ball tightly and enjoyed the embrace of Liesel, who had become like a mother to him. The lady understood that they would soon be separated, but despite this, she still made the boy a promise that she could not keep. The woman mentally apologized to the baby. Meanwhile, someone else needed Lapel. The subordinates told a gentleman that they had clarified some details and were convinced that the woman who had taken the boy was at the Duke's estate. The gentleman asked the men if they were sure it was the same child. One of the men said that the child had black hair and red eyes. The gentleman became very curious about who the woman was. The gentleman was surprised because the woman turned out to be the Baron's daughter, Liesel, frozen, about which there was constant gossip. The men had no more information, so the gentleman was angry. The influential man called his subordinate Hazen and ordered him to get rid of the garbage. Hazen instantly drew his sword and killed the men. The master was finally able to take off his mask. The man wanted to start with the magical realm, as he was not satisfied with the work of his subordinates. Meanwhile, Roan came to the Duke and gave him the documents. The man said that according to the investigations, the accident was clearly not accidental, and that Leon himself was the target. Chester was furious and slammed his fist on the table. He couldn't understand who had dared to kill his brother. The master wanted to punish the guilty as soon as possible. His Majesty wanted to see at least a list of suspects. But there was a problem, as the family had many enemies. Roan pointed out that it would be nice if they had the evidence of the only survivor, Lapel. The nervous Duke went to the commander of the knights. He wanted to come to him personally. The man also asked Roan to bring the warden. Chester was eager to get some fresh air, so he went into the forest first. He didn't understand why Leon had to die. His Majesty couldn't recall his brother having any bitter enemies. Chester, no matter what it cost him, wanted to find the criminal to find out the whole truth. Suddenly, the man heard women's voices and hid under a tree. The servants asked each other if any of them were afraid of the Duke. The women gossiped that the Duke himself might have killed his older brother to gain the title. One servant tried to dispel the women's suspicions, but noted that it still gave them goosebumps to think that such a thing could even happen. His Majesty did not want such gossip to become known to everyone. Chester was completely innocent of his brother's death. On the contrary, he always loved and supported him. The Lord did not want his reputation to be unfairly tarnished. The Duke came to Shane. His Majesty had come so suddenly that the man thought something had happened. Chester wanted the chief knight to immediately assemble a reconnaissance party of the best knights. Shane asked what exactly His Majesty was looking for. Chester silently handed the man the documents. Quickly reading the information, the knight was surprised. Because such a thing was hardly possible, Chester wanted Shane to explain everything. The knight promised the Lord that the task would be completed as quickly as possible. His Majesty ordered him to take the warden with him, as he would be useful. Warden is a smart hunting dog who never fails. The task was not an easy one, but His Majesty wanted to find the culprits. The knights set off to do their work. Roan hoped the men would come with good news. Chester wanted to be alone, so he asked everyone to leave. The Lord craved some peace and quiet from the surrounding noise. Chester went back into the forest and sat down on a bench. The anger that the man had been holding back was eating him up inside, but the rustling of the leaves still calmed him down a little. His Majesty decided to rest alone with nature. The man wanted silence, but he heard that Liesel and Lapel were playing nearby. It was quite noisy, and the Duke decided to go to another place. Suddenly, a ball appeared near the gentleman's foot. The lady immediately ran over and was surprised, because she did not expect to see anyone there. Liesel asked the Duke for forgiveness. Lapel miscalculated his strength, and the ball flew too far. The lady noticed that the gentleman had a very dissatisfied face, and she wanted to leave as soon as possible. Chester politely handed the ball to Liesel. The lady saw the same wound on the man's arm. She was concerned that His Majesty had not treated the wound at all, and she told him so directly. The lady also added that if she didn't do this, she could catch tetanus. The Duke had no idea what the woman was talking about, but he noticed that she was angry and serious. The gentleman waved his hand and assured her that he would take care of the wound later. But Liesel put her hands on her hips and wanted the Duke to treat the wound immediately. She believed that if Chester got sick, she would feel guilty. The lady looked at her husband intently and expected him to do something. The Duke tried to assure the woman that he was completely fine. Suddenly, Liesel called the maid Tia and asked her to leave Lapel on Kay and bring a first aid kit. The Duke was surprised at how quickly the lady began to give orders. He wanted to quietly leave, but the lady sat down next to him. The woman also added that the man was somewhat petty and could not even tolerate her for 5 minutes. The situation was becoming increasingly tense. The lady did not want to sit next to her husband at all, but she had to make sure that he would definitely disinfect everything. Tia immediately brought a first aid kit. Smiling, Liesel handed the first aid kit to the Duke and asked him to disinfect his wound himself. The woman exclaimed that Lapel was waiting for her and quickly ran away. The man thought he had made a huge mistake. Evening came. The lady carefully adjusted the boy's pillow and bed and asked if he was ready for bed. The joyful Lapel exclaimed that he had already put on his pajamas. The lady clapped her hands and praised the boy. The woman suggested that the baby wrap himself in a blanket. She also wished him good night and sweet dreams. Suddenly, Lapel asked Liesel when they would return. The woman asked in surprise where they should return to. Lapel wanted to go back home, but the woman assured him that this was his home. The boy almost had tears in his eyes because he wanted to go back to his grandparents. Liesel laughed and agreed to go visit them, but on the condition that the boy eats well, plays, and grows. Lapel nodded his head and soon fell asleep. In the morning, at breakfast, the lady thought there was something wrong with the boy, as he was picking at his food in a strange way. But Lapel insisted that everything was fine, although he was not in the mood at all. Liesel could clearly see the child sitting there, sighing in front of her. The woman guessed that if she told him they would be home soon, the boy would be in a good mood again. But the lady couldn't lie all the time. In fact, Liesel herself was afraid of the impending separation. To somehow distract Lapel, the woman suggested that the boy take a walk around the city, assuring him that there were many interesting things around. The lady encouraged Lapel, saying that they would go to a store with sweets and toys. The boy's eyes immediately lit up. and he happily agreed to have such a fun time. The woman needed to get permission from Chester first. She was saddened because it occurred to her that the Duke might forbid her from leaving the city, explaining this by the fact that it might be dangerous. Even during a normal walk in the garden, Liesel and Lapel were always accompanied by Kay and Tia. The woman sometimes felt eyes on her and guessed that Kay was not alone, but with company. Liesel was nervously pacing in front of Chester's office, trying to figure out how to properly excuse themselves so they would be let go. Suddenly, Roan approached the lady and asked if Lady Liesel had any business with Chester. The butler thought that Liesel was afraid of disturbing the Duke and asked her not to worry about it. The woman nodded and decided to go in anyway. When His Majesty heard Liesel's request, he flatly refused to listen to her. The lady knew in advance that this was how their conversation would end, but still asked her husband to think again. Liesel was in despair because she had promised Lapel that they would go for a walk. The woman explained that it was very important for a child to actively learn about the world at such an early age. The Duke said that there was no need to go anywhere unless absolutely necessary. Suddenly, Liesel noticed that the Duke had bandaged his hand and praised him for it. Chester said it was just a scratch, and he was just afraid of catching tetanus or something, so he dressed the wound. Roan asked what tetanus was, but the man didn't have an answer to that question, because he didn't know himself. Liesel noticed that Chester was blushing. She remembered their conversation in the woods and smiled. The lady turned to the butler and asked if shyness was inherent in the Duke. The woman noted that when she took his hand, he became quite disappointed and blushed. Chester, nervous, didn't want the lady to continue such a delicate conversation. So the man reminded her that Liesel was going to take a walk around the city. The woman laughed and asked if the man had said it was dangerous. His Majesty said that if there were several attendants, everything would certainly go smoothly. Chester did not want to see the lady in front of him at that moment, so he was ready to let her go with the baby for a walk. Chester felt very bad because Liesel had decided to embarrass him in front of Roan for turning her down. The man was absolutely convinced that the woman was a fraud. When Lapel went out for a walk, he ran happily, looking around. The boy was in high spirits. Liesel only asked him not to run far. The little boy ran to the nearest toy store. He was so emotional that he hugged the window. The boy's eyes were shining, and he wanted to buy something for himself. But there was a problem because Lapel couldn't choose anything. Everything was beautiful. Liesel had intended to simply take the child for a walk. She could not have imagined that the boy would turn out to be such a spendthrift and start begging for literally everything. The lady opened her purse and realized that she was short of money. She even considered selling her necklace. Nearby, there was a sweet shop selling sweets that cost 100 shillings. The price of the lollipop was as much as the lady had in her purse. The woman offered Lapel a sweet lollipop, and the boy agreed. The happy little boy ran and jumped happily. The lady sighed and was happy. Everything went without any major financial expenses. Suddenly, a thief grabbed the handbag of a respectable lady. Liesel and Lapel's guards wanted to take the side of justice, but the thief was very fast and ran right past the guards, and they didn't even have time to do anything. Everyone was amazed at the man's speed. It seemed that the respectable lady was feeling unwell. The knight approached the woman and asked about her health. The man also promised that his acquaintance would definitely bring her bag. Liesel was surprised because the guard should have been worried about Lapel first. The brave Lapel told Liesel that he himself could protect her and asked her to stand behind him. Suddenly, the thief appeared on the horizon. The lady was frightened because the man ran straight towards them with Lapel. Liesel, in despair, grabbed the child in her arms. It seemed that the man wanted to take the baby away. But the thief tripped over his foot and fell at Liesel's feet. The lady could not understand how the criminal could simply fall in front of them simply because Lapel was the main character. The kid saw the bag of a respectable lady at his feet. Liesel asked the boy not to touch anything and to come to her. Lapel still picked up the bag, but the thief simply ran away. The guards decided not to catch up with the man because he was too fast. The respectable lady thanked everyone for their help. The lady noted that it was just a strange coincidence. As a token of gratitude, the lady handed Liesel a precious bracelet. She insisted on taking it. The woman thanked her for her help and left. Liesel shouted for the lady to wait, but she never came back. The situation was quite strange. The necklace looked expensive, but the whole thing was somehow suspicious. Nobody carried a spare pair of diamonds in their handbags for emergencies. The thief also fell very stupidly. It was very strange that the unknown lady thanked not the knights, but Liesel. The lady looked carefully at the necklace, and it even occurred to her that it was cursed. The young lady decided to push it away. Suddenly, Lapel grabbed the lady by the hand, pointing with his finger where he wanted to go. Nearby, the boy saw something interesting. The display case was covered with various decorations. Meanwhile, Liesel wondered whether to melt the necklace somewhere or leave it. The woman had a hard time resisting herself because the real Liesel was very fond of such jewelry. Lapel saw a strange star shining. The seller said that it was the last music box, and he was ready to give it away for just 1,000 shillings. The woman realized how hard it was to be poor with a child in her arms. Her heart broke with every refusal. Lapel took the star in his hands and looked tenderly at Liesel. The boy asked if he could have such a chest. The lady decided to sell the necklace. The expert noted that the stones were fake and was ready to buy it for 2,000 shillings. The amount was small, but it was quite suitable for the lady. The woman happily threw the baby up and told him that this little star would be his. Liesel also wanted to spend all the money. She shouted loudly that she would treat everyone to drinks at her own expense. The people around were very happy about this news. Everyone wanted to get a free drink. Lapel happily ran and circled next to Liesel, the respectable lady whose purse was stolen, and the thief turned out to be hired workers. Beliv, who hired the young men, was furious that Lady Liesel had sold the necklace. The young people fell to their knees and begged the Lord for forgiveness. None of them could have imagined that everything would turn out this way. Belov ordered them to be quiet. It turned out that a magic stone was inserted into the necklace. The master ordered his subordinates to return the necklace immediately. The man could not understand how one could be so insane as to sell such a thing immediately and spend the money so thoughtlessly. According to the master's plan, the lady was to wear a necklace, as it met all the standards of beauty of that season. Hazen approached Sir Beliveau and offered to arrange everything himself. Heather was convinced that they should worry about using the stone themselves, rather than waiting for Lady Liesel to put it on. Heather offered to observe the house herself. Believe thought for a moment and praised his husband for his good thoughts. No one knew what the lady would do with the stone next time. Heather thought that the woman's actions were quite difficult to predict in advance. The gentleman gave his husband permission to go to the estate. The next morning, Lady Liesel and Lapel were having breakfast outdoors. The woman was feeding the baby with a straw, which he liked. Meanwhile, Chester had not yet noticed anything wrong with the lady's behavior. According to observations, the lady was taking care of the child, and there was no sign of violence. Roan told Chester that a few days ago, there had been a small incident when the lady asked the servant to put Lapel's interests above her own. Roan also reported that something else interesting was found during the Baron's inspection. Shortly before arriving in the duchy, Lady Liesel sold all of her luxurious dresses and accessories to help her father pay off his debts. Roan laughed, thinking that a vulgar gossip girl could not have done such a thing. It even occurred to the man that the lady had changed quite a bit. Chester thought Roan was too trusting, and was convinced that people didn't just change. The man asked the gentleman to think about his words. There was a possibility that the gossip was exaggerated. Even the most obvious lie could seem true if many people repeated it day after day. The Duke recognized himself because he was considered a fratricide, even though it was a complete lie. Still, the Duke believed it was too early to draw conclusions and asked Roan to keep his eyes on the lady. The man was convinced that no matter how long he watched the lady, they would still see nothing. Roan considered the woman a new kind of star. She was like the sun without any spots. The butler admired how the lady and the boy were having a great time. Meanwhile, Liesel and Lapel were playing hide-and-seek. The woman counted while the boy hid under the sofa. The lady pretended that she couldn't find the little boy anywhere, even though she had noticed where he had been hiding for a long time. The lady had a desire to teach Lapel how to hide properly, in case he wanted to anger the Duke. The kid didn't want the lady to find him, because then he would lose again. While the woman was counting, Lael decided to change the location, so he ran to look for another hiding place. The kid was thinking about where to hide. Suddenly, the boy met Roan, who asked where he was in such a hurry. The little boy wanted Roan to hide him. The boy assured the man that Liesel was a hide-and-seek monster and asked him again to hide him safely. Roan suggested simply carrying the boy in his arms. Since the lady was short, the man thought that she would not notice the child. But Lapel did not agree to this. Then the man suggested that they take the baby to the living room or the library. Liesel was finishing her count. It was quiet enough nearby, so she decided the boy had hidden. Roan brought Lapel into the kitchen, and he immediately ran to hide. But the floor had just been swept, and the child slipped and fell. Roan fell as well. There was a loud crash in the kitchen. Fortunately, the men were safe and sound. In an instant, Roan pushed the plate of flour over, and it all fell on him. Lapel carefully began to free Roan from the flour. The kid imagined it was snow and threw the flour up. To make it more fun, the men sprinkled a little flour on the boy as well. Liesel went to look for Lapel. She opened the door to the living room, but the boy was not there. Then the lady decided that the little boy could have been hiding in the library. She wanted to look for him silently, so as not to give herself away. The woman continued her search in the library. The room turned out to be huge. Liesel saw an interesting book on top and a ladder nearby and wanted to get the book. The woman began to climb the ladder to the top. There she noticed an interesting book and pulled it out. The lady considered the book the key to a happy life as a strong and independent woman. The book was called How to Turn Your 10,000 Shillings into 10 Billion Shillings. The lady considered the characters of the Hielos brothers and realized that they would hardly buy such an unnecessary and pointless book. The woman thought that with the help of that book, she would be able to increase her capital. She wanted to pay off her debts and multiply the remaining 20 million that the Duke would give her many times over, and then live a wonderful life. Something went wrong, and the lady fell off the ladder. The woman kept her eyes closed, but she felt that she was not in any pain, and it seemed as if someone was hugging her. When the lady opened her eyes, she saw that she was in Chester's arms. The man was as handsome as a sculpture. His features were very attractive to the woman. Liesel's heart almost jumped out of her chest. Lady blushed and felt ashamed and uncomfortable. She couldn't stand being so close to Chester, so she started kicking and begging him to let her go. Liesel decided that it would be right to pretend to be ashamed and lower her head. Otherwise, she thought she would look impudent. The woman also thanked the man for not getting hurt because of him. Liesel noticed that Chester was looking down at her in a veiled way, pretending to examine his hand. The woman smiled at him and apologized for peeking into the library without permission. The lady explained that she was looking for Lapel, with whom she had been playing hide-and-seek. Chester looked closely at the lady and noted that the boy had not come in. Liesel said goodbye and quickly left the room. The man was sure that Liesel could not lie at all. Suddenly, Chester caught himself thinking that he remembered the lady's face. He also wondered what kind of book she was holding to her chest. Chester picked up the same book. He thought it was a bad book because it wasn't an investment book. The Duke wished he had thrown it away after reading a few paragraphs. His Majesty laughed, convinced that the lady saw in the book a direct guide to wealth. The man could not believe that the lady wanted to become a billionaire simply by reading the book. Meanwhile, the woman went to look for the baby. She felt uneasy because the man was hugging her, and her heart was beating faster. Suddenly, Liesel heard Lapel laugh. Laughter came from the kitchen, and the lady hoped that the boy was not alone there. When the lady opened the door, she saw a very strange picture. Lapel? The cook and the butler were playing with flour. The woman was glad that the men had been with the baby all this time. She laughed because she saw that the young men also got their share of the flour battle. Everyone had fun. Playing with the flour exhausted the little boy, and he fell asleep sweetly in Liesel's arms. The boy slept so sweetly that the lady couldn't even get angry with him, but instead hugged him tightly. Meanwhile, Kay was very tired and wanted to go to bed as soon as possible. Suddenly, the man saw a cute cat. But the cat was not allowed in the territory, and Kay wanted to go look for its owner. The animal had a magic pendant around its neck. Suddenly, the cat meowed, and a strange glow appeared. The cat settled into the man's body. In the morning, Mr. Chester was in a hurry. The butler ran after him. The Duke called Shane, for he was impatient to hear the information. His Majesty ordered the knight to tell only the most important things. Shane lowered his head and said he was sorry. The knight and his men carefully examined the entire path from Bern to the capital, but found nothing. Shane bowed humbly and apologized. Chester took a deep breath and exhaled, thanking Shane for a job well done and letting the knights rest. Shane, in turn, suggested expanding the search area and was ready to start at any moment. The Duke insisted that the knights rest. The man understood that the knights would need strength for the further search. Chester wanted the men to be patient and rest properly. One of the knights wanted to take the warden to the box, but Chester came instead and hugged the dog. The Duke wanted to walk the warden before he was taken to the box. The Duke ordered Roan to organize some delicacy for the dog. Kay was with the other knights, but the man was already being controlled by a higher power. One knight called Kay to patrol the estate. Kay looked at his partner in surprise, thinking they would be looking after the guests that day. But the man pointed out that plans had changed, and they needed to hurry. Meanwhile, Chester was walking leisurely through the woods with his dog. The man felt sorry for the warden to have to sit indoors. Since there were guests at the estate, the Duke was afraid that the dog would scare anyone. Chester did not want to let the dog out for free until the boy's identity was established. Warden, a Doberman, had once been given to the Duke by his brother Leon. The man hoped that the boy would really turn out to be Lapel, and then he would definitely introduce him to Warden. It occurred to Chester that Leon would be happy to learn that Warden had become friends with his son. The Duke took the dog for a snack. He asked him to sit for a while and promised to be back soon. Chester hoped the dog wouldn't be too offended that he would close it again. His Majesty heard the voices and quietly opened the door to the room. He saw the lady having a great time with the boy, who even started eating carrots, which he had never seemed to like at all before. For Chester, who usually had a quiet room, he dreamed that if he ever had a family, everything would be the same. Chester decided to go into the room and get what he needed. Liesel noticed that the man looked somewhat agitated. The chef served Lapel the final dessert. The Duke thought that if he had already been spotted, there was no point in trying to escape quickly. The cook was delighted to see the Duke and greeted him. The cook had already prepared raw chicken for the dog and asked him to wait a moment. The lady looked at Chester in surprise and decided that he had very strange taste. The Duke, in turn, did not understand the lady's sly look. The woman decided that Chester had hinted to her that she should leave the room because he wanted to eat raw chicken alone. Liesel got up from the table and indicated that she and Lapel needed to go. Chester noticed that the lady hadn't even touched her plate because she was cooking the baby. The Duke asked Liesel to sit down and eat and ignore him, but the lady wanted to leave. His Majesty asked the cook to bring him a chicken. The lady nevertheless decided to express her opinion. She looked at Chester intently and explained to him that it was better not to eat chicken raw because it could cause poisoning. Chester looked at the lady in surprise and did not understand what she was saying. The woman insisted that meat should be cooked, for example, boiled, fried, or stewed, but not eaten raw. The lady also noted that she did not condemn the Duke at all and wished him a delicious meal. The man grabbed his head. He could not even think that the lady would think of such a thing. Chester laughed loudly. Hayes and the chef were talking in the kitchen. The chef claimed to have seen the Duke laughing with his own eyes. Hayes couldn't believe it and was sure the man had messed something up. Roan approached the men and asked if the menu for the week had been approved. Roan sensed a tense atmosphere and asked if everything was okay. Hayes said the chef was trying to prank him and said he saw the Duke laughing. Roan noted that sometimes that happened because the Duke knew how to smile, because he was a living person after all. The cook said that the Duke needed a chicken for the warden, and then he began to laugh out loud. The men thought the Duke's behavior very strange, because no one had ever seen the Duke laugh out loud. Roan thought for a moment. He wondered what had happened and what had caused the master to laugh so loudly. The atmosphere in the manor had become somewhat lighter lately. Liesel was playing in the meadow with Lapel. They had a lot of fun together. The boy was always very energetic after eating. Lady understood that at her age, it was difficult for her to catch up with a very fast toddler. As expected, after a long run, the boy fell and started crying. Liesel immediately ran to him, but the baby calmed down very quickly. Lapel had recently been bathed and combed, but he was already dirty again. The woman felt how hard it was to worry about the child every day. The baby took up a lot of strength and energy, although she really liked it. A few minutes later, Lapel was running around the meadow again. At one point, the little boy ran a little further, and the excited Liesel insisted that he come back. Suddenly, the boy started calling for help. The frightened woman quickly ran to the child. The lady saw a big dog standing next to the child. The woman was terrified. She asked the baby to stand still and not move. Lapel cried and said he was scared. Liesel tried to calm the child, assuring him that everything would be fine. The woman whispered to Lapel that she would slowly approach him and ordered him not to move. The lady understood that if the dog suddenly lunged at Lapel, it would be the end. Something had to be done urgently. The dog growled incessantly, making it clear that it had no intention of leaving. The little boy was trembling with fear, and Liesel tried to calm him down. The dog, which barked incessantly, was about to attack. The woman noticed this and ran up to the child. She hugged Lapel tightly. A terrible barking and screams arose in the clearing. Chester came running at the very loud noise and ordered the warden to stop. When the man ran up, Liesel and Lapel were on the ground, and the dog was next to them. The enraged Duke ordered the Doberman to quickly go back. The dog, with its ears down, politely obeyed the owner's command. The man was very scared and worried about the health of the woman and the boy. Chester also apologized because he had not noticed anyone walking into the clearing. Liesel tried to calm Lapel, who was still crying. The baby was afraid for the woman's health because she was lying down and not getting up. The lady's whole body ached, but she was happy that the threat was over and everything was fine. The Duke even thought the woman was injured, and he asked her if she was okay. Liesel, on the other hand, didn't know when she would stop getting into an awkward position right under Chester's nose. The woman smiled and hugged the child tightly, glad that everything was okay. Chester looked at the lady again and asked if she was the one who was injured. The woman was silent. Roan ran up to the young men. The Duke shouted so loudly that the butler immediately ran to look for him. Roan saw a strange sight and was frightened, worried that something had happened. The woman explained that she had simply fallen. The men thought that she had not been able to get up. In fact, the lady could not feel her legs at all. It even seemed to her that her body had not yet recovered from the shock. Liesel awkwardly admitted that there might be problems, as she wasn't sure she would be able to stand up on her own. The kid was scared that the lady was injured after all and hugged her tightly. Roan wondered in surprise what had happened. Lapel began to cry again, for he was certain that Liesel had been hurt because of him. The lady felt very uncomfortable. The lady assured the baby that she would rest and feel much better. She also asked Lapel not to cry over trifles. The Duke ordered the butler to take the baby, but the baby did not want this at all and began to be even more capricious. Chester lifted Liesel into his arms. The lady blushed as she was too close to her husband. She explained to the Duke that she would lie down on the grass herself and then try to get up. His Majesty would not listen to anything at all. He asked Roan to bring the doctor to the lady's room. The butler looked at Chester with curiosity, for the lady had said that everything was fine, and in spite of everything, the Duke had decided to carry her in his arms. A few minutes later, the doctor examined Liesel. He asked her not to worry and assured her that the bone was fine and it was just a slight sprain. The doctor recommended applying ice and not putting too much pressure on the leg. The man also added that the lady would soon recover. Excited Chester sat down next to Liesel. The man felt guilty. Liesel thought about it. During her stay at the estate, she had sat on the Duke, fallen right into his arms, and also rolled on his arms. The lady could not understand why everything turned out in such a strange way. The woman remembered how all the workers of the estate stared at her and at Chester as he carried her in his arms. The lady thought she would burn with shame. She mentally begged the Duke to leave her alone.